For 3 days, Mia Bennett had been secretly dying, hiding 3 shattered ribs and a lung slowly filling with blood. Every breath was a new agony, a silent plea for the end. Her boss, Derek Harrison, had done this. He dragged her across a parking garage and beat her until she no longer recognized her own face. For 3 agonizing days, she covered the bruises with makeup and wrapped her broken body in bandages bought with her last $20. She couldn't scream. She couldn't break, not when her 19-year-old sister Rose was in a hospital with a failing heart. Rose was waiting for a surgery that cost $300,000. Creditors called 6 times a day about her mother's medical debt. Her landlord had already changed the locks. This job was the only thing keeping her sister alive, so Mia wore her pain like armor and walked into work pretending to be whole. But broken bodies do not care about sacrifice. And on that third day, while presenting to 20 powerful executives, her body finally gave up. Her vision blurred. The world spun sideways. She fell, but powerful hands caught her before she hit the floor. The hands were covered in tattoos of serpents and thorns. They belonged to the man at the head of the table, the man no one dared to meet in the eye. Matteo Valente, the 36-year-old chief executive officer of Valente Corporation. He was the Viper of New York, a shadow king who owned judges and senators. He had watched Mia for 8 months, fascinated by the fire in her spirit, and now he held her broken body in his arm. What he felt was pure rage, not at her, but for her. In that silent room, Matteo Valente looked at the woman in his arms and made a promise. The person who did this would beg for death, and this stubborn, incredible woman would never have to fight alone again. Mia Bennett wasn't looking for a prince. She was about to find protection in the shadow of a devil. When you have nothing left, a monster is the only salvation that counts. This is a story about a woman who refused to break, no matter how hard the world tried to crush her. It will show you that your darkest moment can become the beginning of your greatest chapter, and sometimes the one who saves you is the last person you would ever expect. If you are already hooked, hit the like button. Share this and subscribe, because what Matteo does next will change everything. When Mia opened her eyes, she was not in her own bed. The sheets were soft, and the room was filled with gentle light. This room was as large as her entire apartment, with glass walls overlooking Manhattan at sunset. She tried to sit up, but a sharp pain stole her breath. Only then did she see the clean white bandages around her ribs. An intravenous line was in her arm. A heart monitor beeped steadily beside her. She was wearing a large black shirt that smelled of expensive cologne. Where was she? The door opened. A man in his 60s, with silver hair and glasses, walked in. He said his name was Dr. Thomas Reed. Mia tried to pull away, her back hitting the headboard. The doctor held up his hands to calm her. He explained she was safe in Mr. Valente's penthouse. She had been unconscious for almost 10 hours. Valente. The name was an alarm bell in her mind. Matteo Valente, the Viper of New York. She remembered tattooed hands catching her before the darkness came. I need to go, Mia said, reaching for the intravenous line. Dr. Reed told her she could not leave. He said she had 3 broken ribs, a punctured lung, and severe internal bleeding. He explained that a few more hours without medical care would have been fatal. Mia froze. She knew she was hurt, but not that badly. Who did this to you? The doctor asked. She insisted it was an accident. He looked at her with eyes that had seen too many lies, then left the room. The door opened again. The man who entered made her forget how to breathe. Matteo Valente was tall and powerful, dressed in a perfect black suit. His face was like stone, sharp and cold. But his eyes were the most terrifying part. They were steel gray, like a gathering storm. He stopped by the bed, a massive, frightening presence. He spoke her name. His voice was low and calm. He listed every detail of her life, her age, her job, her sister Rose in the hospital. He knew about the $270,000 in medical debt. He knew she worked nights at a bar. And he knew that 3 days ago, someone beat her in his company's garage. Mia could not breathe. This man knew everything about her shattered life. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice trembling. Matteo studied her. "The real question," he said slowly, "is who touched something that belongs to me, and why are you protecting him?" He did not wait for an answer. He turned and walked out, closing the door silently. His silence was worse than any threat. 20 minutes later, he was in his office on the 52nd floor. His bodyguard, Tony Russo, stood before him. "I need everything," Matteo said, his voice flat. "Get the garage security footage from 3 days ago. Check her emails and any company reports. Investigate Derek Harrison. Find out everything." Tony nodded and left. Matteo turned his chair to face the city lights. He had been watching Mia for months. She was different from everyone else. She did not play games or seek favor. She just worked, hard and alone. A sandwich. She walked 15 minutes to the subway instead of hailing a cab. Every detail painted a picture of a woman fighting a silent war. When she fell into his arms, Matteo finally saw the enemy. It was the savagery of men who thought they were gods. His phone buzzed. Tony had sent the first file. It was footage from a garage camera, time-stamped 3 days ago at 11:17 at night. Matteo pressed play. For the next 14 minutes, he witnessed an inferno. Derek Harrison stepped out from behind a pillar. Mia turned to flee. He grabbed her by the hair, yanking her back. She used pepper spray, but he slapped it away and hit her in the face. Then he beat her. He punched and kicked and stomped her, smashing her head against concrete. For 14 minutes, she fought to get up, fought to survive. And for 14 minutes, Derek Harrison laughed like a demon enjoying his work. When the video stopped, Matteo's gray eyes were pure black. It was a look those who knew him called the color of death. The last time anyone saw that color, 5 men disappeared from the world. The second file was from Human Resources. Mia had reported Derek Harrison for sexual harassment 7 days prior. Margaret Shaw, the department head, had noted insufficient evidence. She recommended the employee be cautious about making accusations against senior management. Matteo's jaw tightened. The third file contained Derek Harrison's emails from the last 6 months. There were 37 messages to Mia Bennett. They were filled with suggestions, threats, and promises of a promotion for a dinner date. They also held warnings about refusing. The last email was sent 2 days after the attack. It said, "I hope you learned your lesson. Next time, do not refuse someone above your station." The fourth file was Derek Harrison's spotless record from his 8 years at Volante Corporation. But Tony had looked closer. 4 other female employees had quit in the last 3 years. All had worked for Derek. 2 had moved away. 1 would not talk. And 1, a 23-year-old woman, had jumped from a building 6 months after she resigned. Nobody looked into it. Nobody cared, because Derek Harrison's uncle was Richard Harrison, a board member. The last file they showed the hallway camera from the 32nd floor, just an hour before the meeting. Derek Harrison paused at Mia's desk. He leaned in and whispered to her. Mia flinched, as if from a burn. Derek just smiled and left. Matteo turned off the screen. He sat in the darkness for 15 minutes, perfectly still. Then he made a call, his voice as casual as if ordering to coffee sorting. "Derek Harrison, to warehouse number 3. Does the boss want him alive? There was a 3-second pause. Alive, Matteo said, his words slow and poisonous. I want him to live long enough to learn the meaning of regret. Mia waited until 2 in the morning. The penthouse was quiet. City lights cut stripes across the floor. She had feigned sleep for hours, planning her escape. She could not stay. She could not be indebted to Matteo Valente. The stories said those who owed him became his puppets, their strings pulled until they were no longer useful. Mia Bennett had lost too much to give up the one thing she had left, her freedom. She sat up slowly, biting her lip against the pain as she pulled the needle from her arm, wiping the single drop of blood on the sheet. She put her feet on the floor. The marble was like ice. Mia had no shoes, no phone, and no money. She wore only the black shirt of the man she was fleeing. She did not care. She had endured worse than a barefoot walk through New York. She opened the bedroom door into a long, dark hallway. Mia kept one hand on the wall for balance. Each step was agony. Her broken ribs grated together, and her lungs burned for air. But she thought of Rose. Her sister was alone in a hospital, probably scared, probably wondering where she was. Mia reached the elevator and pushed the button. Nothing. She tried again. The elevator was locked. Her hope died. She turned toward the emergency stairs. The steel door was heavy. She shoved with her entire body, pain screaming in her chest. The door swung open, and Mia froze. Matteo Valente sat on the top step. He held a glass of whiskey, as if he had been expecting her all along. 2:17, he said, not looking at a watch. Your pain tolerance is higher than I thought. Mia took a step back. I have to leave. That is not a request, Mr. Valente. It is a fact. I am leaving now. Matteo rose slowly. His movements were controlled and dangerous. He was a foot taller than her, and vished in the tight stairwell, he was everywhere. Where are you going, Mia? Home? To the apartment you were evicted from 3 days ago? Mia went rigid. Or maybe to Mount Sinai Hospital. Your sister is in room 72 on the 3rd floor waiting for a heart valve surgery you cannot pay for. Stop, Mia whispered, her voice trembling. You have no right to look into my life. I have every right when someone is attacked inside my building, and I know more than you realize. Matteo moved closer. Mia's back hit the cold wall. I know you have worked 2 jobs every single day for 14 months. I know you eat 1 meal a day to save for your sister. I know you sold your mother's car last month for the hospital bills. And I know that yesterday morning you had exactly $37 to your name. Mia was speechless. She wanted to scream at him, to hit his cold, handsome face. She wanted to collapse and cry. She did none of those things. She just stood there, shaking, trying not to break. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice raw. What do I have to do for this help? Be your mistress? Your toy? Matteo tilted his head, a flash of anger in his eyes. Is that what you think I am? I do not know what you are. I only know that nothing is free. He was quiet for a moment, studying her. Then he spoke, his voice lower than before. You are right. Nothing is free, but my price is not what you imagine. Then what is it? Matteo raised his hand and gently touched her chin, lifting her face to meet his gaze. You will stay here until you are healed. You will tell me who did this to you and why you protected him, and you will stop acting like your life means nothing. Mia wanted to fight him, to tell him she did not need his pity, but his gray eyes held no pity at all. They held something else, something that felt far more dangerous. His concern was real, and that terrified her more than any threat. The next morning, Matteo was true to his word. A black Mercedes waited outside. Tony Russo stood by the open door. Mia stepped out of the elevator in clothes someone had chosen for her. They fit perfectly, as if the person who bought them knew her exact size. She did not ask. She did not want to know what else Matteo Valente knew. He did not go with her. Tony drove in silence through the Manhattan streets. Mia sat in the back, the city a blur outside the window. She had only one thought: Rose. Her sister had not seen her in 4 days. For a 19-year-old with a failing heart, 4 days was an eternity. The car stopped at Mount Sinai Hospital. Tony opened her door. "You have 1 hour. I will wait." Mia just nodded. She had no energy for pointless arguments about being watched. She just needed to see her sister. The hospital corridor was long and white, smelling of disinfectant. The scent was a familiar pain. Mia had walked these halls hundreds of times in the last 2 years, ever since Rose's heart condition had gotten worse. Each visit, she feared it was the last. Room 72. She took a deep breath that hurt her broken ribs and pushed the door open. Rose was in the bed, looking small and pale among the machines. Her brown hair was spread across the pillow. Her blue eyes, just like Mia's, were empty of life. But when she saw her sister, they lit up, then filled with tears. "Mia." Rose's voice was weak, but full of blame. 4 days. "You were gone for 4 days with no word. I thought you were dead." Mia sat beside the bed, trying to keep her expression calm. "I am sorry. Work was busy. It was a lie." Rose grabbed her hand, squeezing with surprising force. Mia was shocked by the strength left in her fragile sister. "You always lie. You say everything is fine, but you get thinner every week. You say you are not tired, but you have dark circles under your eyes. And now you show up wearing all this makeup to hide something." Mia said nothing. She had underestimated her sister. Rose was sick, but she was not a fool. "Let me see." Rose raised a hand and touched Mia's cheek. Mia flinched. But it was too late. Rose's finger wiped away the makeup, revealing a dark bruise. The young girl's eyes grew wide with horror. "Mia, who did this to you?" "No one. I fell. Stop lying to me." Tears ran down Rose's face. "I am not a child. I know you are doing everything by yourself. I know you work 2 jobs. I know you skip meals to pay for my hospital bills. And I know you are slowly killing yourself for me." "Rose, do not say that. What else can I say?" "The truth," Rose cried, her body shaking so much the heart monitor sent out an alarm. "I am a burden. Without me, you could have a normal life. You would not have to suffer like this. You would not get hurt because of my bills, because of the money you need." Mia pulled her sister close, ignoring the sharp pain in her own chest. She held on tight, afraid Rose might disappear. "Listen to me." Mia's voice shook but remained strong. "You are not a burden. You are the reason I am alive. After Mom died, I wanted to die too. I had no reason to get up in the morning. But then I saw you, 17 and alone in a hospital, and I knew I had to be strong. You are all I have, Rose, and I will do anything to keep you alive. Anything." "But you cannot keep doing this," Rose cried on her shoulder. "You will die because of me. I cannot live with that." "I will not die," Mia promised, though she was not sure if she believed it herself. "I promise, and I promise you will get your surgery." "How? Where will we get the money?" Mia thought of Matteo Valente. She thought of his penthouse, Dramsa, his strange offer, and the price she would have to pay. "I will find a way," she said. This time, it was not a lie. The sisters held each other in the sterile white room. The steady pulse of the heart monitor was a reminder that time was short. Mia knew she had no choice. She would stay with Matteo Valente, not because she wanted to, but because it was the only way to save Rose. When Mia got back to the penthouse, Matteo was waiting. He sat, in a black leather chair with a glass of whiskey, but he was not drinking. He just watched her walk in, his gray eyes revealing nothing. "How is your sister?" he asked. Mia stopped, surprised. She had been prepared for many things, but not for him to show concern. "She is fine," she said flatly, "as fine as someone can be when they are dying and have no money for an operation." Matteo put his glass down and stood up. "The surgery will be next week." Mia stared. "What? I talked to her doctor while you were there. All the costs have been paid. The best heart surgeon on the East Coast will operate on Rose, number." Mia shook her head and took a step back. "I told you, I do not want charity. And I told you, this is not charity." Matteo moved toward her, his voice calm. "This is justice." Mia was confused. Justice for what? Matteo was quiet for a moment. He seemed to be deciding what to tell her. Then he took out his phone, played a video, and handed it to her. "You should see this." Mia took the phone with shaking hands. The screen showed a living hell. It was a dark room with concrete walls. Derek Harrison was tied to a chair. His face was swollen and bloody. 3 large men surrounded him. One of them was S, a man she had seen at the penthouse. In the video, S held a pair of pliers and spoke to Derek. Derek screamed and begged. Then a terrible shriek filled the air as S used the pliers to break each of his fingers. 1, 2, 3. Mia dropped the phone like it was on fire. She felt sick. She wanted to scream and run away from this room, away from this terrifyingly calm man. "What did you do?" she whispered. "I did what was necessary." Matteo picked up the phone and stopped the video. He will never hurt another woman. Not because he is sorry, but because he no longer has hands to do it. Mia felt weak. She backed away until she hit a wall and slid to the floor. Matteo kept his distance. He just stood there, looking at her without any regret. "You are a monster," Mia whispered. "Yes," he said, not denying it. "I am a monster. I have done much worse things, and I will do them again if I have to. But Derek Harrison deserved this, not just for what he did to you, but for all the others." Mia looked up, her eyes wide. "All the others?" Matteo sat across from her, leaving enough space so she would not feel trapped. 4 women quit in the last 3 years after working for him. 2 of them left the city. One refuses to speak about it, and another, a 23-year-old, jumped from the 12th floor of her building 6 months after she quit. Mia gasped. She killed herself because of him. No one looked into it. No one asked why, because Derek's uncle is on the board. Because the company was paid to ignore it. Because in this world, powerful people can do whatever they want. There was a long silence. Mia did not know what to feel. She felt horror, but also relief. A part of her was glad Derek Harrison would never hurt anyone again. "Who are you?" she finally asked. "God?" "No," Matteo answered, his voice low and dark. "God forgives. I do not." He stood up and looked down at her. "The money for your sister's surgery is not a debt. It is compensation that Derek Harrison owed you. We took it from his private account before he lost the ability to sign his name. You owe me nothing, Mia. The person who owed you has paid." He started to leave, then paused at the door. "Get some rest. Dr. Reed will check on you in the morning." Then he was gone, leaving Mia alone with her confusion. How could one man terrify her, but also make her feel safer than she had ever felt in her life? The first week in Matteo Valente's penthouse was a silent war. Mia put up a wall between herself and the man who had saved her. It was a wall of silence and distance. She refused any help that was not essential. She spent most of her time in her room, coming out only for meals or for Dr. Reed's visits. She never spoke unless someone spoke to her first, and her answers were short. "Yes, no, I am fine, thank you." Matteo gave her space. He did not try to talk to her or invade her privacy. He did not ask for anything. He only showed up for dinner. He would sit at one end of the long table, eating in silence, while Mia sat at the other. She hated his calm. She hated how he looked at her, as if he knew exactly what she was thinking. She hated that he was always in control, no matter how cold she was to him. The worst part was her inability to truly hate him. Each morning, breakfast was waiting on her small table. It was simple food, but it was hers. Oatmeal with honey, made just like her mother's. Toast with peanut butter. A preference she had mentioned to a colleague months ago. She never understood how he knew. On the third day, she found the closet filled not with designer dresses, but with her style of clothes. Soft sweaters, jeans that fit perfectly, and white sneakers. Her favorite library books, the ones she could never afford, sat on a shelf. Mia reached for one, her hand shaking. This level of detail was unsettling. He knew what she ate, wore, and read. Yet instead of feeling violated, she felt seen. For the first time, someone truly noticed her, and it was terrifying. She was not accustomed to being cared for. She knew only how to fight, to carry her burdens alone, and to force herself back up after every fall. Matteo Valente's kindness was a weapon she could not defend against. By the fifth day, she broke. At 10 that night, she found him by the fireplace reading. He looked up, waiting. "Why this?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "This what?" he asked. "The food, the clothes? Are you trying to own me?" Matteo set down his papers, his gray eyes unmoving. "Does kindness always need a motive?" he asked. "No one is kind for no reason, especially not your kind of person." "My kind?" he repeated, his tone curious. "What do you know about me? I know you are a mafia boss. I know you kill people. I know you tortured Derek Harrison. And you believe I will do the same to you?" "No," Mia said, the truth of it surprising her. "I am afraid I will start to trust you. Then you will betray me like everyone else." A tense silence filled the space between them. Matteo stood and moved closer. "Who betrayed you, Mia? Your father, who died and left your family with nothing? Your mother, who passed away when you were 22? Or your ex-boyfriend, who promised you love but gave you 3 years of pain? And Derek Harrison, who promised a career and nearly killed you in a garage? Every time I trust someone, I get hurt." She felt a tear fall and turned away ashamed. But Matteo's voice stopped her. "I am not them. I do not make promises. I state facts. You are safe here, and I want nothing from you. Whether you believe that is your choice." He returned to his chair and his reading as if she were dismissed. Mia stood there, feeling the walls she had built begin to crack. On the 8th day, a call came from the hospital, not with bad news about Rose, but with a shock. "Miss Bennett, I am calling to confirm your family's hospital debts have been paid in full." The finance officer's voice was professional and distant. Mia stood frozen. "All debts? What do you mean, all of them?" "Everything," the employee confirmed. "The cancer treatments for Mrs. Patricia Bennett, the long-term care for Miss Rose Bennett over the last 2 years, the upcoming heart surgery, and 6 months of aftercare. A total near $500,000 was paid yesterday by a company called Valente Holdings." Mia did not remember hanging up. She only knew she was suddenly standing outside Matteo's office, her body trembling with a cold fury. She threw the door open without knocking. Matteo was on his phone, speaking in Italian. He saw her, spoke one last sentence, and hung up. His gray eyes met hers without surprise, as if he had been expecting this. $500,000, Mia's voice shook. "You paid it without telling me?" Matteo leaned back, his calm making her want to scream. "Are you angry that your family's debt is gone?" I am angry that you think you can control my life. You said the surgery money was from Derek's account. You said nothing about my mother's debt or 2 years of Rose's bills because you knew I would refuse. Of course I would have refused, she cried, slamming her hands on his desk. You do not have the right. You cannot just erase my life's burdens like it is a game. You cannot put me in your debt for an amount I could never repay. Mateo stood up. Despite her anger, Mia flinched at his towering height. You do not owe me anything. I want no repayment. Then what do you want? Mia yelled. No one gives away $500,000 for nothing. What is your price? Do you want my body, my soul? His eyes darkened. For the first time, she saw a flicker of hurt in his expression, gone almost instantly. Is that what you truly think of me? He asked, his voice low. I do not know what to think, she replied, her voice softer now. I only know that every time someone has helped me, they have demanded a price far too high. You have given me so much, I am terrified of what you will ask for. The air between them was heavy. Mateo sighed, a rare sound of weariness from a man who seemed unbreakable. 20 years ago, he said, his voice quiet, my father had liver cancer. He needed a surgery we could not afford. We were poor immigrants. My mother begged for help. She sold everything we had. It was not enough. He looked directly at her. My father died for $50,000. For the wealthy, that is a party. For us, it was life. I swore at his grave that if I ever had power, I would never let anyone else suffer that way. Mia was silent. Her anger was gone, replaced by a fragile understanding. $500,000 is 2 weeks of my income, Mateo continued. To you, it is a mountain lifted. Why would I demand payment for something I have in excess? He stepped closer. I do not want your body or your soul. I want you to stop slowly killing yourself over debts that were never your fault. Tears fell freely from her eyes. Why? She whispered. Why do you care so much about me? Mateo did not answer. He just looked at her with his deep gray eyes. In them, Mia saw something new. Pure respect, with no strings attached. And that look shattered her defenses completely. The morning of the surgery arrived too soon. Mia woke at 4, her mind racing. She sat in the dark, watching Manhattan come to life, and prayed. Please let my sister live. Please do not take the only person I have left. Mateo had arranged for the best surgeon, the best team, and an entire private floor for security. When Mia had asked why, he answered simply, because your sister deserves to be treated like a princess today. At 6 in the morning, Mia arrived at the hospital. Rose was already prepared, pale in her hospital gown, but she managed a weak smile for her sister. I am so scared, Rose whispered, and Mia squeezed her hand. I know, Mia answered, her own voice a thin wire of control. Everything will be fine. You will fall asleep, and you will wake up with a brand new heart. Do you promise? I promise, Mia lied. She knew it was a promise she could not make, but she had to erase the fear from her sister's eyes. A nurse arrived to take Rose to the operating room. Mia walked beside her until the double doors swung shut, watching her sister fade behind the glass. Then she began her wait. 1 hour, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hours, crawled by like an eternity. She sat completely still in the waiting area, a statue carved from anxiety. She was so lost in her dread that she did not notice Matteo until a glass of water appeared before her. You need to drink, he said, his voice surprisingly soft. Mia just shook her head, certain that if she spoke, she would shatter. Matteo did not insist. He simply took the chair next to her. a silent, solid presence in her personal storm. The clock on the wall ticked like a bomb. Each minute felt like one less minute of Rose's life. Every quiet moment flooded her mind with terrible images. Rose never waking up, Rose gone forever, leaving her alone just like everyone else she had ever loved. After the 7th hour, the doors to the operating room opened. A surgeon emerged, his mask hanging below his chin. Mia shot to her feet, her own heart frozen in her chest. The surgery was a complete success, the doctor said, his voice bright with good news. The new valve works perfectly. Rose will recover and live a normal, healthy life. Mia did not remember what happened next. She only knew that her legs buckled. If Mateo had not been there to catch her, she would have collapsed. All the pain she had held inside for years finally broke free. She began to sob, not with quiet tears, but with raw, ragged sounds of pure exhaustion and relief. She cried because Rose would live. She cried for the sleepless nights and the constant fear. She cried from the guilt of wanting to give up, of wishing she did not have to bear this weight by herself. And she cried with gratitude for the man who was holding her together. Mateo remained silent. He just held her, one arm around her back, while the other rested on her head, letting her bury her face in his chest. He did not ask her to stop or offer meaningless reassurances. He was just a steady anchor until her inner storm passed. When Mia finally pulled back, her face was swollen and wet. She looked into Mateo's gray eyes and saw an emotion she was afraid to name. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice broken. "Thank you for staying." He raised a hand and gently brushed a tear from her cheek. "There is nowhere else I would rather be," he said, and Mia finally believed him. From that day on, everything between them started to change. The shifts were so small she barely noticed them at first. No major declarations were made. Instead, tiny cracks formed in the wall around her heart, letting in small rays of light. By the second week, Mia stopped eating alone in her room. She joined Mateo at the dining table, and they ate in a comfortable silence. Later that week, she found him reading late at night. Instead of retreating, she sat on the opposite sofa with her own book. They read for hours without a single word. When she finally stood to leave, she wished him good night. He responded with a nod, his eyes warmer than she had ever seen them. On the third day, Mia decided to cook. She entered the kitchen at 6 that evening and made a simple pasta from her mother's recipe. When Mateo came home, he stopped in the doorway, watching her with open surprise. "You do not have to do this," he told her. "I know," Mia said, not looking away from the stove, "but I want to." That night, they ate her pasta. Mateo told her it was the best thing he had eaten in years. While she doubted it was true, a genuine smile touched her lips for the first time in a very long time. The next day, Mia told Rose about the man who was helping her. She did not use his name or mention his world. She only said someone had been very kind. Rose's eyes twinkled. "You like him," she teased. Mia quickly denied it, but the heat in her cheeks gave her away, and Rose's clear laughter filled the room. On the 5th day, Mateo was late. Mia told herself she was just reading, not waiting. But when he finally arrived at 1 in the morning, she had warm ginger tea ready for him. He looked from her to the cup and back, his expression unreadable. "You do not have to wait up for me," he said. "I know," she replied, "but I want to." On the 6th day, Mia truly laughed. It happened when Mateo spilled coffee on his white shirt and cursed under his breath. He looked so offended that she could not stop laughing. When she finally grew quiet, she found him watching her with a serious expression. "You have a beautiful smile," he said softly. "You should use it more often." Mia felt her face burn, and had to look away. On the seventh day, a frightening thought struck her. She did not want to leave this place. Not for the luxury, but for the man she had promised herself she would never trust. She was falling for him, and the scariest part was that she no longer wanted to stop herself. That night, she found Matteo alone on the balcony, staring at the lights of Manhattan. She almost turned away, but then she noticed something was wrong. His shoulders were slumped, not held straight and proud. His hand was clenched on the railing, knuckles white. In his other hand, he held a worn photograph, its corners soft from years of handling. "What day is it?" Mia asked softly. Matteo did not turn. "It is the anniversary of my father's death," he said, his voice hollow. 20 years ago, today, he died right in my arms." Mia stepped beside him. She glanced at the photo and saw a kind-faced man standing next to a teenage boy who had the same gray eyes as Matteo. "He looks like a good man," she said. "He was the best I ever knew," Matteo answered. For the first time, Mia heard a crack in the voice of New York's most dangerous man. He came to this country at 20 with just $500 and a dream. He worked 16 hours a day, doing any job he could find. He met my mother at a small church, and they married with nothing but love. He paused, his gaze lost in the city lights. "When I was 7, my father opened a small grocery store. We were not wealthy, but we were happy. Every night, he would read to me and tell me, 'Son, never let this hard world make you a bad person.'" Matteo's voice grew hard. "He was wrong. What happened?" Mia asked, dreading the answer. Matteo finally turned to her, his eyes filled with a darkness she had never seen. "When I was 16, a local gang demanded protection money from my father's store. He refused. He said he would rather die than give in to criminals. He took a deep breath, so they killed him." Mia covered her mouth, her chest aching for him. "They came on a Saturday. 4 men with guns. My father shoved me into a corner and stood in front of me. He begged them to spare me. He offered them anything they wanted. 'Just do not touch my son.'" Silent tears streamed down Matteo's face. Mia knew this might be the first time he had cried in years. "They shot him 7 times, right in front of me. 7 times. I could only watch him fall while the floor turned red. He was still whispering my name. 'Matteo, my son, do not be afraid.' Those were his last words. I held him until the police came, until his blood was on my clothes. I swore that day I would never be powerless again." Mia said nothing. She just reached out and touched his arm, a small gesture of comfort. "After the funeral, my mother fell apart," Matteo said, his voice empty, like he was telling a stranger's story. "She stopped eating and sleeping. She just cried my father's name. 6 months later, she died of what they called a broken heart. The doctors said heart attack. I knew the truth. She could not live without him. At 17, I was an orphan with nothing." He turned to face the city again, his voice becoming hard as stone. "I had 2 choices. I could die like my parents, or I could become something the world feared. I chose the second option. I found the same gang that killed my father, and I joined them. I learned to fight, to shoot, to make men afraid, and when I was ready, I hunted down every man who was there that night. One by one, slowly." He looked at Mia, his eyes clear and honest. "From that, I built this empire with blood. I became the monster everyone is afraid of. I broke every rule my father ever gave me. And I do not regret it. In this world, good men like my father die. It is the monsters, men like me, who survive." Mia stared into his gray eyes, seeing the darkness and the pain. In that moment, she understood. Matteo Valente was not born a monster. The world had made him one. And somewhere inside, that dangerous man, a 16-year-old boy, still cried, holding his father's body. It was 3 in the morning. The penthouse was dark and silent, but Mia could not sleep. Mateo's story echoed in her mind. A young boy, his clothes soaked in blood, the sound of gunshots in the night. She knew that kind of pain. She knew what it was to lose everyone you loved and be forced to keep going. After another turn, she finally gave up. She put on a robe and went outside her room. A small light from the kitchen stopped her. Someone else was awake. Mia found Mateo by the island. He held a glass of whiskey, but had not touched it. He wore a simple black t-shirt and pants, looking less like a mafia boss and more like a normal man. "You cannot sleep either?" he asked without turning. He already knew she was there. Mia moved closer. "Your story is still in my head." He finally looked at her. "I should not have told you. It is my burden, not yours." "No," Mia shook her head. "I want to know you. I want to understand." "Why?" "Because you understood me," she said, her voice a soft whisper. "You knew my pain before I said a word. You never judged me. You never pitied me. You just helped me. I want to offer you the same thing." Mateo put his glass down and faced her completely. In the faint light, his gray eyes were softer. They were not cold steel anymore, but the sky after a storm. "You owe me nothing, Mia." "I know," she said. "This is not about debt. This is what I want to do." A quiet settled between them, but it was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people standing on the edge of a great change. Mia spoke first. "On the balcony tonight, when you cried," she began carefully, "I realized something." "What? That you are not a monster. You are just a man who was hurt so badly that you used darkness as a shield. I understand that. I have done the same." Mateo just looked at her, and she saw something new in his eyes. It was not control or calculation. It was vulnerability. It was the loneliness of a man who had stood at the top for too long, with no one beside him. "Are you not afraid of me?" he asked. "I should be," Mia confessed. "You are everything I was warned about. Dangerous and ruthless, but you are also the one who caught me when I fell. The one who saved my sister. The man who showed me that darkness can also be a shelter." Mia stepped closer until only inches separated them. She looked up into his eyes, and every fear, every reason to stop simply vanished. "What do you want?" Mateo asked, his voice low and unsteady. Mia did not use words to answer. She rose on her toes, put a hand on his chest, felt his heart race, and then she kissed him. Their first kiss was not gentle. It was filled with weeks of unspoken feelings. The anger from their first meeting, the caution, the slow understanding, and now a powerful desire. Mateo kissed her back with a force that took her breath away. One hand held her neck, the other pulled her waist, holding her close as if she might fade away. He kissed her like a drowning man finding air. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing heavily. "You know what this means, right?" Mateo whispered, his breath on her lips. "If you enter my world, there is no leaving. I will not let you go." Mia opened her eyes and met his intense gaze. "Maybe I do not want to be let go." That was all he needed to hear. He kissed her again, deeper this time, a silent promise that she was now his, and he would destroy anyone who tried to harm her. In Mateo Valenti's life, happiness was always short. Mia was about to learn that lesson in the cruelest way. In the 3 days after that kiss, the walls between them fell. They ate breakfast together and talked more. Every night, Mateo would kiss her before she slept. He said he wanted to wait for her to recover completely, but the kisses were enough to make Mia feel weightless. She forgot that in the shadows, other predators were always watching. Richard Harrison did not accept defeat. He learned that Mateo had crippled his nephew, Derek Harrison. He wanted revenge. Richard was a board member at Valente Corporation, but he had other, darker connections. He spent 2 weeks watching the Serpent of New York. He learned his enemy's greatest weakness was a woman named Mia Bennett. Attacking Mia at the guarded penthouse was not an option. Richard needed an easier target. He found Rose. It was the 5th day after Rose's surgery, and she had been moved to a regular room. Her recovery was so good that she could go home in a week. Mia had visited her that morning, bringing flowers and talking about Mateo. Rose teased her until Mia's face turned red. They laughed together, feeling like the worst was finally over. Mia left the hospital at 3 in the afternoon, promising to come back that night. She did not know it would be the last time she would see her sister smile for many hours. At 6 that evening, Mia's phone buzzed. It was a message from a number she did not know. When she opened it, her blood turned to ice. It was a video. Rose was tied to a chair, blindfolded, with tape over her mouth. She was still in her hospital gown, shaking and crying. A man's cold voice spoke. "Hello, Miss Bennett. I am Richard Harrison. My nephew Derek cannot call you anymore, so I am sending his regards." The voice laughed. "You have 2 hours. Come to warehouse number 7 at the Brooklyn docks. Alone. Do not tell Valente. If I see anyone else, your sister will die, and I will mail you the pieces." The video stopped. Mia stood frozen in the living room, unable to move. The phone felt slick in her shaking hand. This was not happening. Rose was just out of surgery, her heart still weak. A shock like this could kill her. Mia glanced around the empty room. Mateo was in a meeting and would be gone for another hour. She could have waited, let him handle this threat the way he handled Derek. But the man on the phone, Richard, was perfectly clear. If Mateo showed up, Rose would die. Mia could not bet her sister's life on anything. Her hands trembled as she scribbled a note, leaving it on Mateo's desk. She changed her clothes, called the elevator, and walked out into the darkness alone. This was probably a trap. She understood she might not survive. But when it was her life or Rose's, there was never a choice. She had promised her mother she would always protect her sister. She would keep that promise, even if it cost her everything. The Brooklyn docks were another world, a stark contrast to the bright lights of Manhattan. There was only darkness here, pierced by the salty air and the howl of wind through rusted shipping containers. Mia paid the taxi driver 200 meters from warehouse number 7 and told him not to wait. She stood on the empty road, her heart hammering against her ribs. The bones had not fully healed, and each deep breath sent a jolt of pain through her. But that was nothing. The fear for her sister was a physical weight, crushing the air from her lungs. Rose was in their hands. She was alone and terrified. One wrong move from Mia, and her sister would die. Taking a ragged breath, Mia began to walk toward the warehouse. Her sneakers were silent on the broken pavement. She had switched off her phone. If Mateo called, and she did not answer, he would find a way to track her. She could not allow that to happen. She could not risk him appearing and making things worse. Richard Harrison's instructions were simple. Come alone, or Rose dies. Warehouse number 7 was a massive iron building with shattered windows. A single weak light seeped from the cracks around a rusted door. It was the only sign of life. Mia paused at the entrance, balling her hands into fists. She had no weapon, she had no plan. All she had was love for her sister. She hoped it would be enough. She shoved the heavy door. The shriek of metal echoed in the huge space. Inside, a few bare bulbs cast circles of light in an ocean of shadows. In the center of one circle, Rose sat on a chair. Her hands were tied, a blindfold covered her eyes, and tape sealed her mouth. She was crying, her small shoulders shaking with muffled sobs. A piece of Mia's heart broke. "Rose, I am here," she started forward, but the sound of slow clapping stopped her. How very touching. Richard Harrison's voice dripped with poison. Sisterly love is a powerful thing. He emerged from behind a steel support beam. He wore an expensive gray suit, looking ready for a business meeting, not a kidnapping. 5 large, armed men followed him. Mia saw at once that fighting was impossible. "I am here," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Let her go." Richard let out a cold laugh that bounced off the high ceiling. "Let her go? After what your lover did to my nephew? Derek will never write his name again, Miss Bennet. His hands are useless. And you expect me to show mercy? I had nothing to do with that. Derek attacked me. He got what he deserved." "Perhaps," Richard said with a shrug, "but we believe in an eye for an eye. Valente took my nephew's hands. So I will take his heart. And you, Miss Bennet, you are his heart." The blood in Mia's veins turned to ice. He was not going to release Rose. He was going to kill them both. This was never an exchange. It was an execution. "What do you want?" she asked, playing for time she did not have. "I want Matteo Valente to feel pain," Richard answered, his eyes burning with a mad fire. "I want him to know what it is to lose everything. I want to see him on his knees. When he comes for you, I will kill you right in front of him. Then your sister, then him." He was truly insane. Hatred had destroyed his mind. "He does not know I am here," Mia said. "I did not tell him." Richard smiled with fake sympathy. So naive. "You think the most powerful man in this city does not watch your every move? You think he would let you just walk out?" He checked his watch. "I expect he will be here in about 15 minutes. Then the show can begin." Mia looked at Rose, who was trembling with fear. She had to do something. She could not just wait here to die. She had survived so much already. Beatings from Derek, years of abuse from an ex-boyfriend, the death of her parents. She would not die in this warehouse, and she would not let Rose die. 12 minutes later, the world went black. The lights in the warehouse shut off at once. Richard swore, yelling for his men to get their flashlights. But before they could move, the first shot rang out. One of Richard's men screamed and fell, his knee destroyed. A second shot followed, then a third. In less than 10 seconds, 3 men were on the ground, wounded but alive. The shooter was not trying to kill them. He was disabling them. He wanted them conscious for what came next. Mia took advantage of the chaos. She ran to Rose, shielding her with her own body. She ripped the tape from her sister's mouth and tore at the ropes on her wrists as gunfire echoed around them. "What is happening?" Rose cried, clinging to Mia. "It is okay. I have got you," Mia whispered, though she was not sure of anything. "Just stay down." Suddenly, the lights flashed back on. Mia looked up and froze. Matteo Valente stood in the middle of the warehouse. His black suit was immaculate. The gun in his hand was still smoking. Tony, Sal, and at least 20 other armed men surrounded him, closing in on Richard Harrison's men. 4 of the 5 gunmen were on the floor, moaning in pain. The last one stood next to Richard, shaking, his gun aimed at nothing. Richard Harrison, who had been so arrogant minutes ago, was pale as a ghost. "Valente," he stammered, his voice thin. "How did you find us?" Matteo did not answer. He just walked toward him, his steps heavy with menace. His gray eyes were no longer steel. They were black pits. It was a look everyone knew meant death. "Did you really think I would let her leave alone?" Matteo's voice was a low growl. "Did you think anything happens in my city that I do not know about? I knew she was gone before the elevator doors closed. I knew she was coming here before her taxi stopped. And I knew you had her sister the second your men stepped into that hospital." He stopped a few feet from Richard, his gun level with the man's forehead. "Your mistake was thinking I would panic, that I would come running in here, alone like a hero in a movie. I am not some fool in love, Harrison. I am Matteo Valente. When someone touches what is mine, I do not rescue. I erase. Richard trembled and held up his hands. We can make a deal. I have money. Anything you want. Matteo tilted his head, as if he were thinking about it. Then he pulled the trigger. The bullet tore through Richard's leg. He collapsed, screaming as blood pooled on the floor. I want you to suffer, Matteo said, stepping over him. I have what I came for. His dark eyes softened to gray the moment he saw Mia and Rose were unharmed. He nodded at Tony, a silent command to get them out. Tony helped a trembling Rose stand up. The young woman was still crying, clutching Mia as if her life depended on it. Mia went with them, but looked back one more time. Matteo was a figure from a nightmare, standing in the blood-stained warehouse among his fallen enemies. He looked like a god of war, and Mia knew she was not afraid of him. She was afraid of losing him. Will he be all right? Rose whispered outside. More dark cars were waiting for them. Mia heard screams from inside the building. She knew Richard Harrison was not going to die tonight, but he would pray for it. He will be fine, Mia said, and she finally believed it. He is Matteo Valente. He is always fine. Matteo did not come back to the penthouse until 4 in the morning. Mia was waiting on the living room sofa. She could not sleep, even after the hellish night. Tony had taken Rose to another safe apartment. Doctors and a full security team were watching her around the clock. A mild sedative had finally helped her rest, but Mia could not rest. It was not fear that kept her awake. She needed to see Matteo. She had to know he was safe. The elevator doors slid open, and she stood up immediately. He walked in without his suit jacket. His white shirt had rolled up sleeves, revealing dried blood on his arms. He paused when he saw her. His gray eyes understood everything before his face relaxed. You need to be sleeping, he said. His voice was tired, but soft. I could not sleep until... I knew you were safe, Mia answered, moving toward him. Are you hurt? No. Matteo shook his head. None of this blood is mine. A quiet moment passed between them in the large, dimly lit room. Mia had so many words inside her, but did not know how to begin. So she said the first thing she thought of. I am sorry. Matteo's brow furrowed. For what? For leaving. For not telling you. I thought I could fix it myself. I did not trust you. Tears stung her eyes, but she fought them back. I know you must be angry. It was reckless. But Rose is my sister. I could not let her die. Matteo was silent for a long time. Mia thought he was too furious to speak. Then he sighed. Do you want to know what made me the most angry? His voice was low. It was not that you left. It was your letter. Mia blinked, confused. What about it? You wrote that I should take care of Rose if something happened. You wrote that you had no regrets. That the last few weeks were the best of your life. Matteo came closer, and his gray eyes burned with a mix of anger and hurt. Your letter sounded like a goodbye. It was like you had accepted death. Like your life was just a price to pay for your sister. As if you had no idea that I would burn the city down if I lost you. Mia was speechless. She had prepared for his anger over her disobedience. She thought he would be mad about her recklessness, or for messing up his plans. She never imagined he would be angry that she was willing to sacrifice herself. I am sorry, she whispered, and this time she cried. I did not know what else to do. I just knew Rose had to live. I cannot lose another person. And you believe I could handle losing you? Matteo asked, his voice shaking. You think I spent 8 months watching you, protecting you, and loving you just to let you walk into a death trap? What kind of man do you think I am? You love me? Mia asked, her heart stopping. Matteo froze, as if the words surprised even him. He let out a long breath and his shoulders slumped. I think that has been obvious for some time, he said gently. I love you, Mia Bennett. I am not sure when it started. Maybe in that meeting, maybe even before. I only know that when you fainted in my arms, I promised I would never let you fall again. Tonight, reading your letter, the thought of you being gone made me realize my world is empty without you. Mia closed the space between them and threw her arms around him. He held her back tightly, as if she was the most precious thing he had ever held. I love you too, she said into his chest. I love you for who you are. I know your world is dangerous, and I am choosing it, not out of debt and not out of fear. I am staying because I cannot imagine a world without you in it. Mateo pulled away, just enough to look into her eyes. Are you certain? Because if you stay, I will never let you leave. You will belong to me. Mia smiled through her tears. I have been yours since you caught me. That was all he needed to hear. He kissed her then. It was a deep, gentle kiss filled with the promise of a difficult future, but it was a future they would face together. 3 months later, Mia Bennett barely knew the woman in the mirror. Her skin, once pale from stress, was now glowing. The worry in her eyes was replaced by a deep happiness she never thought she would feel. Her brown hair fell over an elegant black suit. A new name badge was pinned to the lapel. It read, Mia Bennett, Director of Strategic Operations, Valente Corporation. Mateo had promoted her 2 months ago. He told her she had earned the job long before they met. He was just fixing the mistake of those who ignored her talent. Mia's new office was next to Mateo's on the top floor of the 52-story tower. She managed a team of 15 people and had her own budget. She had a voice in every important meeting. The colleagues, who once ignored her, now treated her with respect. They did not fear Mateo. They respected Mia, who had proven her skill. In the first week, Margaret Shaw, the human resources head who protected Derek, was fired. The department was completely changed. It now had a new reporting system for harassment, investigated by an outside firm. Mia had designed it herself. Richard Harrison was gone from the board. His money was frozen, and he was in a federal prison, facing charges from kidnapping to conspiracy. No one knew where Derek Harrison went. They only knew he had left the city for good. But the biggest change in Mia's life was not her job. It was her sister, Rose. She was perfectly healthy now. Her surgery was a complete success, and she had started her first semester at Columbia University with a full scholarship. A scholarship Mia was sure Mateo had arranged. Rose now lived safely in an apartment near her school, with protectors watching from a distance. Every weekend, she joined them for dinner, calling Mateo her scary brother-in-law. Mateo would act annoyed, but Mia knew he cared deeply for her sister. When Rose struggled in a class, he found her a tutor. When she passed her exams, he sent flowers. He even joked about vetting any boy who tried to date her, which Rose found both terrifying and funny. Just last week, Rose had said with tears in her eyes, "This feels like a real family. I haven't felt this way since Mom was alive." Mia hugged her sister, crying not from sadness, but from overwhelming gratitude. Without my say-so, you put your hands on what belongs to me, Richard, and now there is a price. The last thing Mia saw was Richard Harrison falling to his knees, his face a mask of absolute terror, as Mateo's men led her and Rose away. She did not need to see what came next. She knew his punishment would be worse than a quick end. A week later, Mia watched Rose playing with Mateo's dog in the penthouse garden. A warmth filled her chest. It was a happiness so complete it felt unreal. Her life had changed entirely in just 3 months. She went from running from violence and debt to standing beside the most powerful man in the city. She was no longer a woman hiding her pain, but someone who was loved and fiercely protected. It still felt like a dream, but this was her new reality. Every morning, she woke up next to Matteo, with the sun streaming through the windows. But Mia felt no cold in Matteo's embrace. He held her from behind, his chin resting gently on her head. They stood in silence, looking out over the city, where they had endured so much. "What are you thinking about?" Matteo asked, his voice a low rumble near her ear. Mia smiled. "I was thinking that 3 months ago, I was standing here with 3 broken ribs. I did not know if I would survive another day. Now, I am in the arms of the man I love, living a life I never thought was possible." Matteo turned her to face him. His gray eyes were filled with a softness he showed only to her. "You know," he said, "the day you collapsed, I thought I was saving you. But the truth is, you saved me." "Me?" Mia asked, confused. "I had been in the dark for a very long time," Matteo said, his hand gently touching her cheek. "I had forgotten what it felt like to be loved. I believed I deserved only fear. Then you came along. Your eyes did not hold fear, and your spirit refused to break. You showed me that even a monster could be loved." In that moment, Matteo went down on one knee, and Mia felt the air leave her lungs. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. Inside was a diamond ring that sparkled against the city lights. "I am not good with words," Matteo began, his voice shaking just slightly. It was the first time Mia had ever seen New York's most dangerous man look unsure. "I am a killer, a boss, the darkness people fear. I have done awful things, and I will do them again to protect those I love. I am not a good man, but I love you. I love you with everything I have. You brought my heart back to life. And I want to spend my entire life making you happy and keeping you safe. Mia Bennett, will you be my wife?" Tears of pure joy ran down Mia's face. She did not need to think. She already knew her answer. "Yes," she whispered, and then said it again, louder. "Yes, Matteo, I will." He placed the ring on her finger, then stood to kiss her. It was a deep, gentle kiss filled with the promise of their future. When they parted, Mia looked from the ring to the man she loved. "You know," she said, smiling through her tears, "3 months ago, I thought collapsing was the worst thing that could happen to me. I was wrong. Falling apart led me straight to you." Matteo gave her a rare smile. "And I will always be here to catch you, every single time." They held each other on the balcony, surrounded by the lights of the city. 2 broken people who had found each other and become whole. Some women hope for a prince to rescue them. Mia Bennett fell into the arms of a devil in a designer suit. She learned that when the world takes everything, the protection of a monster is the only real salvation. Sometimes, you do not need a hero's light. You just need a darkness strong enough to protect you from all the others. And for Mia, Matteo Valente was that darkness. This story teaches us that our lowest moments can be the start of something beautiful. True strength is not about avoiding falls, but having the courage to get back up. And love can appear where you least expect it if you are brave enough to accept it. Most of all, it shows that no one should have to face their battles alone. Did this story make you think about your own life? Have you ever felt like Mia, carrying your burdens in silence, afraid to hope for better days? Or maybe you have been like Matteo, hiding your own pain behind a wall of strength. We would love to hear your story. Please share your thoughts in the comments so we can connect with you. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications for more stories like this one. Remember to like this video and share it with anyone who needs a little more hope and love in their life. Every subscription and every share helps us continue to bring these stories to you. Thank you for being with us today. We wish you and your family good health, happiness, and peace. No matter how hard life gets, Remember that the sun always shines after a storm, and sometimes the person who helps you up is the one you never saw coming. Goodbye for now, and we look forward to seeing you in our next video. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful lessons and inspiration to our audience.